The Battle of Santo Domingo. The capture of Santo Domingo was a military and naval action fought on the 1st of January 1586, of the recently declared Anglo-Spanish War that resulted in the assault and capture by English soldiers and sailors of the Spanish city of Santo Domingo, governed by Cristóbal de Ovalle on the Spanish island of Hispaniola. The English were led by Francis Drake and was part of his great expedition to raid the Spanish New World in a kind of preemptive strike. The English soldiers then occupied the city for over a month and captured much booty along with a 25,000 ducat ransom before departing on 1 February. Background: war had already been unofficially declared by Philip II of Spain after the Treaty of Nantes, in which Elizabeth I had offered her support to the rebellious Protestant Dutch rebels. The Queen, through Francis Walsingham, ordered Sir Francis Drake to lead an expedition to attack the Spanish New World in a kind of preemptive strike. Sailing from Plymouth, England, he first attacked Vigo in Spain and held the place for 2 weeks, ransoming supplies, after which he struck at Santiago in November 1585 in the Cape Verde Islands, plundering the place, then sailed for the Americas. Drake arrived in the Caribbean in December to the uninhabited island of St. Kitts, where he landed his sick and sought supplies. Whilst there, he sent a small reconnaissance squadron to the Spanish city of Santo Domingo on the island of Hispaniola. Santo Domingo was the capital of Spain's New World Empire, and it was fortified on its landward side by a city wall built in the early 1500s known as the Fortaleza Rosama, in which stood the Torrejonia. The governor, Cristóbal de Ovalle, was well provided with artillery batteries covering both land and sea and had nearly 1,500 men, of which 100 were cavalry. The naval defences of the city consisted of 1 galleon, although it was largely unseaworthy, was still capable of posing a threat. English arrival. As Drake sailed westwards, he encountered his reconnaissance squadron, who told him that Santo Domingo looked too formidable to assault from the sea, but that they had found a good landing beach at the mouth of the Haina River, about 10 miles further to the west. Drake had the fortune of knowing that surprise would be on his side, since the Spanish had no idea the English fleet were in the area. Just after midnight on the 1st of January 1586, Drake arrived off the Bajos de Haina, and Carleal and his soldiers landed on the beach, which wasn't guarded. The path through the jungle that led towards the city was also defenseless, and the English advanced forward. The main fleet under Drake, meanwhile, sailed 10 miles along the coast to Santo Domingo. The Spanish soon saw the threat. Troops were mustered. Work began on building earthworks to defend the shore, whilst many of the townspeople began slipping out of the city. At the mouth of the harbour, 3 ships were sunk to prevent any attempt to force the entrance, but it was too late. Battle. On New Year's Day, Drake's ships lay off the mouth of the harbour, just within artillery range, and his English ships took up the stations. Drake ran out his guns and engaged the castle. The Spanish fire soon replied, and 1 round shot hit the Elizabeth Bonaventure, but most of the balls fell short. Drake ordered his ships in closer, and soon they began firing at the castle and the earthworks, and this got the Spanish distracted as had hoped. Assault. Carleal and 800 soldiers approached the city through the jungle, and by noon they were in sight of Santo Domingo. Drake then sent men in boats to make a show of attempting a landing by way of a diversion. The Spanish in response sent horse, foot and artillery, which advanced out of the city from the 2 gates nearest the shore, with the intention of taking up a position facing the sea, with the cavalry covering the right flank. Scarcely had they formed, however, Carleon and his men swept out of the jungle, formed up into two columns of 1,000 men with standards flying and music playing, appearing on the right flank of the Spanish. Cristóbal de Ovalle, seeing that he would be cut off from the town, took up a new position covering the town gates, whilst his cavalry threatened the English flank and rear under cover of a herd of cattle. Carleon, however, placed his pikemen and musketeers on every side, so that the Spanish were driven back and the cattle simply ran into the jungle. With both columns still advancing, they received the fire of the Spanish guns at very close quarters. An ambuscade of Spanish musketeers beside the road had no better success, as these were quickly driven back by English fire. Within half an hour, the landing party had reached the western walls of Santo Domingo, and the majority of the Spanish troops and militia were in flight. Captured, the western defences were pierced by two gates, the Lembia and a secondary one, closer to the beach. By that stage there were scarcely 300 Spaniards left, most of which had no firearms. Carleon ordered Sergeant Major Powell to assault the secondary gate with the storming party, while the Lieutenant General led the rest of his men towards the Lembia. Both English columns broke into a run and charged at the push of pike. Following a mingled fierce hand-to-hand fight, the Spanish were swept on through both gates and then melted away, after which neither column met with any serious opposition. The stormers did not stop until the two English columns met in the plaza. The English were now inside the town and began hunting the Spanish troops through the streets, heading towards the Fortaleza Rosama, the main defense of Santo Domingo. If this fell, then Santo Domingo would fall. A small group of Spanish troops held out behind its walls, while the remainder of the city was captured without any opposition. Cristóbal de Ovalle fled the battle and left his wife behind, who became Drake's principal hostage. The fortress held out until nightfall, still under bombardment by the English on land and sea, but under cover of darkness the remaining garrison slipped away by boat, and by dawn the English flag was flying over the Torre Homnaya in the middle of the Fortaleza Rosama. The English secured the positions. The battle was over and Santo Domingo was now in the hands. The assault had cost Carleon only 7 killed and around 20 wounded, and given the lack of serious resistance, the Spanish losses were around the same, although they had nearly 200 men captured. Occupation. Drake ordered his men to repair the city's defenses in case of a Spanish counterattack. The harbor was also secured and ships, of which there were over 20, were taken or burned. The English sailors and soldiers then went on a looting spree. Churches were singled out, ornaments were stolen, statues and windows smashed, religious tapestries ripped down, and altars desecrated. Then public buildings were looted, and from private homes the English took what they could, while plenty of goods were captured, including food, wine and tobacco. Only 16,000 gold ducats were recovered from the Ordnance treasury. The cathedral, however, was saved from destruction, as it was where Drake set up his headquarters, and prayers and psalms were sung and said in thanks to God for the victory. Ransom. Drake knew the Spanish would be willing to negotiate a ransom in return for the saving of the town and the lives of his prisoners. On the 12th of January, the head of the city judiciary, Juan Malarayo, approached Drake and negotiations began. Drake demanded a huge figure of 1 million ducats, which the governor declared himself wholly unable to pay. Malarayo procrastinated, and as talks continued, Drake ordered civic buildings and churches to be put to the torch, one after the other. Applying extra pressure on Malarayo, Drake's men began demolishing the city's imposing stone buildings, which exhausted the English sailors due to the intense labor. The next Spanish negotiator was Garcia Fernandez de Torquemada, the royal factor on Hispaniola, but Malarayo overruled him. Being much more stubborn, Sir Drake set fire to more buildings and threatened to destroy his own headquarters, the oldest church in the whole of the Americas, but eventually, Malayo offered a ransom of 25,000 ducats. Payment finally, the deal was agreed, and Drake promised to spare what remained of the town and sail away from it if the ransom was paid promptly. Drake sent a delegation to the Spanish camp with a message with a black boy freed from slavery who had recently joined the English. The Spanish, however, thinking this as an insult, stabbed and killed him, which infuriated Drake so much that he had many Spaniards deliberately executed until the murderer was found dead or alive. The Spanish complied and brought the man to justice by hanging him in front of the city. The ransom was finally paid during the last days of January. Aftermath. On the 1st of February the English sailed away from Santo Domingo, having occupied the city for exactly a month. Upwards of 20 ships in the harbor were burned or sunk. The galley had been torched and 3 vessels were commandeered by Drake to replace 3 of his ships, Hope, Benjamin and Scout, that had to be abandoned as unseaworthy. One of the largest ships that was captured was a 600-ton armed merchant which the English renamed the New Year's Gift. 240 guns and quantities of merchandise were moved into the holds of the English ships. The ranks recruited from scores of liberated galley slaves. A third of Santo Domingo itself lay in ruins, and when the Spanish slowly returned they found all of its civic, military and religious buildings had been destroyed. Garcia Fernandez de Torquemada summed up the mood of the population in his report to the king. This thing must have had divine sanction, as punishment for the people's sins. As Drake left and headed south, news of his attack spread from Santo Domingo to other cities on the Spanish Main, warning that the English were likely to descend on them. Rumors soon spread to Europe, and the Spanish got many conflicting reports of what happened. Pope Sixtus V commented about Drake's action, "God only knows what he may succeed in doing. For Santo Domingo it would take many decades to recover from Drake's onslaught. For the Spanish it was major disaster, in particular a blow to prestige, and for the English a huge morale boost both in England and on board the fleet." Drake's next target was the city of Cartagena de Indias on the mainland of New Granada. Drake attacked and captured the place, giving it the same rough treatment as Santo Domingo. Here the city was better defended and the ransom was more lucrative.